It's a delight to be here. I was at the first Journalism Interactive conference, and it's blown me away to watch how much this conference has grown and how innovative it's become. The whole weekend looks really, really incredible, and I'd like to thank Leslie, who's lovely and wonderful, for inviting me, and University of Missouri and University of Maryland and University of Florida. And I'm thanking them in advance because it's part of a theme that I will be talking about today, which is collaboration. And it's really neat to see universities collaborate in this way. So today, we're going to talk about tech trends as they relate to academia. 3 quick things to tell you. I was a couple of things. I used to teach at various colleges. I don't anymore because I've become too busy, but I loved it. I was a journalist. I call myself now a digital media futurist. It'll be something else in a couple of days. There's no good title for what I do. But basically, my company, and there's about 20 of us, work with other companies on their digital strategy, and we're looking at trends like 2 to 7 years out in the future. That includes some universities. I co-founded SparkCamp, which is a next-generation think tank and convener. We do lots of cool stuff. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today are really fundamental shifts that we're seeing for 2014 and 2015, and what you as academics and you as staff at universities need to know. So this is what it looks like for the next hour, for those of you keeping along. I'm going to go through 6 trends, 3 recommendations, and I'm going to end with 1 syllabus. And hopefully this should make it so that you are all ready for what's happening in the next year. And for those of you who are using Twitter, are you seeing my alter ego in the background? Yes? Tell me if you're not, because that means I just broke some code. Somebody say yes. Okay, thank you, that's helpful. See, now you know what it's like as a student, or for your students. Anyhow, so the first trend is tech first versus digital first. Newsrooms talk a lot about digital first. Digital first has been a lot in the news the past couple of days. And I'm hoping that you'll start to broaden your thinking, because this actually has a direct correlation and impact with what's happening at universities. So I want to start off by telling you about Vox Media. So how many people have heard of Vox Media before? How many of you knew what Vox was before Ezra Klein left the Post? Yeah, like 4 of you. That's okay, that's okay. So Vox does not currently run household, they run some great sites. The Verge is doing terrific work. If you're into sports, SB Nation is huge. And Vox.com will be the property that Ezra takes over. So these were not necessarily names that would have sprung to mind if you're used to reading things like the New York Times and the Washington Post. But I want to talk to you about why Vox Media is a tech-first company and why they're so important. So Vox focuses, it's sort of a given that Vox is a digital property. They don't have a print publication. So they're producing content for the web, for mobile, for tablet. But what's most important is that it's really a tech shop that happens to produce content, good content, great content in some cases. So they've got an incredibly talented team of coders, designers, developers. Some of them are in Austin, some of them are based elsewhere. And they do things like hold hackathons, but these are not normal hackathons like you may be used to. These are like, let's push up our sleeves and solve some really, really complex problems. And it's very much internally focused, so it's not like, let's bring coders together with, my non-for-profit news organization and get some work done for free, right? This is a different kind of thing. This is much more, like a much more professional, egalitarian version and more inclusive version of a hackathon, but very similar otherwise to what you might see in Silicon Valley. And I just want to highlight some of the things that they've done in the past year. So they built a platform for digital native authoring and distribution. So in a sense, it's a content management system. But really what we're talking about is a sort of modern media stack. And even if those words don't make a ton of sense to you, let me just further the point by saying it's one thing to build on top of Drupal, to create a website. It's another thing to think very far forward about what your publishing strategy is going to be, and then reverse engineer all of that and build a system that's meaningful based on your extremely progressive thoughts on how content should be distributed. They came up with a native format for real-time news coverage, which includes a live blogging platform that they handcrafted. It uses Amazon's CloudFront CDN. Again, even if those words don't mean anything to you, suffice it to say that they're using extremely advanced technology and tools and knowledge and programming experience to do something far better and far more customized than anything that exists right now. The thing is that digital first is not the same thing as tech first, okay? Digital first, to me, describes a workflow, and it describes an integration that should already be part of every newsroom. We shouldn't be in a position where we're even saying digital first anymore. It should be a given that news organizations are working together collaboratively, internally, and I would hope with other organizations as well, to produce content that goes out to myriad different platforms. But we still have this sort of digital, the very fact that the word digital first exists, that there was a company built around and recently shuttered the notion of digital first, the fact that this is a phrase that I hear a lot in classrooms, and I know that this is something that universities talk about, this is actually, I think, doing us some harm. Because in thinking about digital first, we're really thinking about multimedia content. And it is difficult to create really high quality multimedia content, but it's something that anybody can do, honestly. It doesn't require a specific set of journalism skills. Technology first is a totally different ballgame, and it's not exclusive of what journalists and academics within journalism are doing. Digital first doesn't solve for some critical issues facing journalism right now, and some extremely critical issues which will be facing journalism in the next several years. Changes to consumer behavior. I can't control the fact that everybody under the age of 18 uses Snapchat instead of text messages, right? And we don't know, people are fickle, and the way that they use their devices are fickle. We can't predict those variables or control for them. Competitors from outside industries. So, there's a whole bunch of different competitors that are dramatically impacting how people use their mobile phones. And not only are journalists not a part of that process, a lot of you probably don't even know it exists. As an example, and I'm foreshadowing a little bit what I'll talk about in a while, but who's seen Secret? So Secret's an app I'll talk about in a little bit. The premise behind it is not awesome necessarily, but the way that that information is deployed is quite smart. New devices that are entering the market. There are OEMs that aren't consulting Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism before they make their new handsets, okay, to make sure that that works with journalism. You've got no control, and never will, over the OEMs and the people who are making the devices that are changing the very nature of how we interact with content and with each other. There are external developers that are making cool apps. There are all kinds of new revenue streams that digital first doesn't solve for. There are back-end technical challenges which are faced by every news organization, especially the large ones. And even if they do invest resources, because they're not a tech-first company, but are instead a digital-first company, those challenges eventually become insurmountable. Content distribution optimization. How many people in here know the announcement that was made by Matt Cutts at Google yesterday? And I know that there are some journalists in the room, so you should know. Okay? There was a big announcement made about algorithms yesterday. A big one that will impact every single news organization in this country. You can't control what Google does, no matter how hard you try. There are changes in search algorithms, and on and on and on. Digital first doesn't solve for this. Digital first doesn't even include any of these things in their conversation. Tech first does. News organizations must evolve into tech organizations that also produce content. Or they have to start to acquire them. And for those of you shaking your heads, none of you are, but if internally you are, I would ask you to think back about 100 years, when somebody in the news business thought it would be a good idea for journalists to control the printing presses. Okay? This is not a different scenario. It's just that the printing presses and that distribution mechanism have become far more complicated, but not so complicated that we can't work with others to solve the problem. And if you really think about it, it's not as though all the journalists back in the day were mechanics too, right? It's not like if I was a journalist, I also knew how to use a linotype machine. Okay? So this is a challenge that's faced and plagued the industry before, and there were plenty of journalism schools out there when this happened the first time around. We're just in version 2.0 of that. And now is a great time to change your frame of reference. Not digital first, but tech first. Tech-first news organizations would include places like Vox Media. So that's what I started off by explaining. Quartz. How many people in here look at Quartz? Quartz is basically the R&D shop side of the Atlantic, and they are doing some incredibly cool things. Circa. I would not say that Circa is a panacea by any stretch. I would not say that they're doing amazing work by any stretch, but I would say that they're taking a different tack. Huffington Post is very much a tech-driven, tech-first type of organization. And although they may not produce hard news, they are producing content. And it's because of the Huffington Post that a lot of news organizations today do something called A/B testing, which is where they show two versions of something, the same variable, like a headline, look to see which one is more popular, and then capture the audience using that better headline. ProPublica is also a tech-first news organization and has some of the smartest people in tech. And Derek is here today, right, I think, speaking there. And I'm going to include, although reluctantly, the New York Times. Here's why I say reluctantly. They're doing some amazing work in technology. They've got some brilliant software engineers, but it takes a very long time for the tech that's being developed to trickle down to everybody else in the news organization. So I wouldn't say that they're tech first, but I would say that they're doing cool stuff with tech. All right, so the second trend is anticipatory computing. And essentially, search is only able to respond to some questions that we ask. And so this is an entirely new way of humans interacting with machines in order to derive information. So I sort of foreshadowed a little bit at the Online News Association conference last year what this is, and I'm going to catch everybody up to speed in what's happened over the past couple of months. But let me first give you a quickie primer. So the furlough happened, last October, and a lot of people were going to Google and typing in, furlough. And so that term became very, very popular. And it also became a challenge from a user's point of view when it came to search. Because depending on who you are, or what you do, or where you live, furlough meant something totally different. So it could be that you were looking for, information related to my taxes, right? I was trying to figure out how does this I'm going to be off for 2 weeks. What does that impact my taxes? Am I going to get paid? Do I still get paid? What happens to my health benefits? I don't know what the word furlough is, right? I've never heard that before. What's the etymology of the word furlough? It could have been anything. So there were a lot of related searches that were happening at the same time. But for the most part, most people just wanted to know, what's the implication of the furlough? What does this mean to me? And that's the part that traditional search engines have had a difficult time trying to solve for. It's very difficult to predict in a case like this without using a lot of contextual information why we were querying that particular term. But that's starting to change, and Google's one leading the cause. So anticipatory computing you can sort of think of as looking at the last couple of minutes of my conversation, whether it's like this, or if it was me typing, in order to predict the next 10 seconds of what my thought process might be. Let that sit with you for just a second. So I want to show this to you in action. So this is what Google Now looks like, and Google Now has been available for a while on Android. It's also available as part of Google Apps on the iPhone, and it's something you should experiment with. So opening up on my phone, it looks at so it's querying a bunch of things. It's looking at my schedule, my contacts, what I've been searching for, where I've been searching for it. And you may have heard of this new design conceit called cards, C-A-R-D-S. And that's what these little white rectangles are. And this has sort of become the basis for a lot of what we're starting to see in terms of mobile deployment. So here are some meetings that I had. It'll do stuff like this morning, I got a notification that it was busier on the road than normal. And so I was supposed to leave 16 minutes earlier. I got a beep on my phone, like, leave right now. And I was like, I can't, but thank you anyways. I will just speed. And Google bought Waze. Waze was an Israeli startup where you could track, enter information as you're driving around. With that information, Google probably already knows that I should maybe not say this out loud if there are any law enforcement officials in the room. I'm a terrible driver, which is why I never ever drive unless I absolutely have to. I speed all the time. This is actually information that Google knows about me, right? And it's not just Google. There's another application that's also anticipatory that's called Glimpse, G-L-Y-M-P-S-E, that launched like 5 years ago. And it's fantastic. My husband and I use it. He tells me when he's leaving his office. We use it to sort of track where we are. And I can see, he's going to be home in 12 minutes. And I can see that he's driving. Yesterday, I was driving to see him, and I was apparently going extremely fast. And when I walked in the door to the meeting that we were at, the other person was like, you've got a lead foot. And I was like, how do you know that? And it was because Brian had shown them me driving on the phone, which is fine. But again, this is about understanding and collecting all of the ambient information that now surrounds us because we are emitting data every moment of the day that we have any kind of device on us. And it's being harvested by companies like this. So these cards then are part of Google Glass. I have very strong opinions on Glass. We're not going to talk about those opinions today. I'd be happy to share them with you later. My basic opinion is that journalists have completely gotten Glass wrong. It's a nicer device than a GoPro maybe in some circumstances to take some video because it's at eye level. And normally, unless you've attached a GoPro to your glasses, this is not a good way, I mean, at least not for me, to collect video. Aside from that, you're not going to display anything of value journalistically. We'll get back to this in a little while. But this is the distribution system, these cards. Okay, we'll talk about this in a little bit. There's another app called Emu, which just came out of beta yesterday, which you can all now download. And so this replaces your text messaging service. So this is my sister and I texting maybe it was yesterday, I don't remember. And I'm saying, hey, are you free? Do you want to go see a movie? Now, if you were to just type this into your whatever you use, that's all that would happen, right? But if you see right below, it's got a calendar listing showing whether or not I'm actually free on Saturday. And then since I said movie, these are all the movies that are playing locally. That it automatically populated because it assumes that this is the next part of our conversation. And it's right. So my sister says, I said Lego looks good. My sister has no taste and wanted to see Captain America. I can click, yes, I said that. I can click this button and we can together or separately watch a video, again, without leaving this environment. And then it tells me what the show times are. I mentioned, should we get dinner here? It tells us, here's where the address is. This is their availability. Again, I haven't done anything but text messaged, okay? Because it assumes now that I'm probably going to want to find out, is there a table? What time is it? And at some point, we're going to have to share a map and directions on how to get there. It's already done all of that for us. Once we've decided we're going to meet at 8 o'clock, it auto-populates our calendars with all of this information. Donna was another app that has just been acquired by Yahoo. And not quite as powerful, but this is really meant to be a sort of virtual assistant. And it queries, again, looks at my driving patterns, so similar to what Google Now is doing in Waze. It looks at my calendar, it looks at who I've been sending messages to, it looks at the weather, and it sort of just keeps me in the loop as I go throughout my day. Another thing that it used to be able to do, if I had a meeting with Bob Smith, I would see a little picture of that person and a little quickie dossier of what they've been saying recently on social media. That just got acquired by Yahoo. And so did Q. Q just got acquired by Apple. Notice a trend? All right, and Q did much of the same. Here's why this matters. This matters because while journalists are very focused in the now and using social media or LinkedIn or Facebook in order to get a contact, they're not thinking in terms of these contextual applications for reporting purposes, but they're certainly not thinking in terms of context for the purpose of publication or deployment. This is not the same thing as related content. Related content is about generating links within a website, and nobody's gotten that right. This is about predicting, if I've just read this, I'm probably going to want to ask these 5 questions, right? And so most people are going to go to Wikipedia to do that. They're not going to use search bars within news websites. Why do you think that is? This is people of all ages, by the way, not just millennials. It's because search sucks on news websites. And everybody in the news business totally agrees with that. This is not newsflash. It's because it wasn't focused for very long. Well, guess what? If you leave something that you know is a critical problem for your user, go for a very long time and assume that that's not something you need to worry about, it causes a ripple effect down the road. And the ripple effect now is that if somebody gets hooked on a story on your website, and you've been talking about, whatever, Fort Hood, they're not going to search on your website. They're going to go back to Google, or they're going to go to Wikipedia to learn more information. They should stay on the news organization's website, but that is no longer consumer behavior. Journalists changed consumer behavior and sent everybody away. So let's try something different. We know contextual tools are here. Let's figure out a way to use them. So I want to quickly show you something called MindMeld, which I showed at O&A, but it's just gotten better since then, and it's worth showing again. This is free. Everybody can download it. And I have a screen protector that on my iPad that I forgot about. So this may not look like anything to you, but let me tell you what it does. So I've logged in. I'm going to click on this little microphone button, and it's going to start listening to everything that I'm saying. And what I'm saying is, I'm about to call Cory Booker and have an interview with him. And what happens is that it recognizes everything I just said, and you may or may not be able to see this, but here's Cory Booker all over my screen. It's giving me background information on who he is. It's giving me the latest headlines, okay? And I can start interacting with it this way. So if I say to Cory Booker, man, that bridge scandal and Governor Christie, what do you think about that? Are you involved in that? Right? I can see all of his public comment recently where he's talked about that. This is like having Google listen to everything that I say and just spit out answers, not any answers which are not meaningful, but those which are relevant contextually with the conversation that I'm having. This thing is, this is definitely still probably the most exciting app, tool, anything that I've seen in the past year, hands down. Every journalist should have MindMeld at their desks. You should always have it on, and you should use it as a reporting tool, because why not? Now, you still have to, I wouldn't just print verbatim the stuff that I'm seeing. Obviously, you would need to vet and verify everything, but this is like having an invisible reporter's assistant there with you at all times, okay? It's an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool. So the third trend is robo-journalism, which I'm going to define as bot beats and machine-derived journalism. So I'm going to not read this entire thing. Some of you may already be familiar with it. I'm going to read the first graph or two. A shallow magnitude 4.7 earthquake was reported Monday morning 5 miles from Westwood, California, according to the US Geological Survey. The trembler occurred at 6:25 a.m. Pacific time at a depth of 5.0 miles. According to the USGS, the epicenter was 6 miles, blah, 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 okay? In the bottom it says, this information comes from the USGS Earthquake Notification Service, and this post was created by an algorithm written by the author. So this is part of a project that was built by Ken, and you've probably now all heard about it. He works at the LA Times. He has a bot that collects information and quickly produces just the basic bare bones of a story, does the write-through. Has anybody seen this story? Okay. This is his GitHub page, where GitHub is a site for people who work in development and code. They collaborate and release their tools, a lot of them, and then they share them with others, and people will sort of collectively work on projects together. So here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing to me is not that a bot or an algorithm wrote this story, although in the media coverage that I saw about this and in the chatter among journalists, that was the story. Robots are going to replace journalists. Okay, and that was very, very popular on social media for 20 minutes until everybody else, Justin Bieber did something, and then everybody switched focus again. Everybody missed the important part of this story, the great part of this story, which is that the algorithm did the grunt work, the stuff that just wastes journalists' time, okay? it was still verified. It just cobbled together what would have been the first piece of that story, which then allowed the journalists who have brains to do the more difficult stuff, which is to do a story about what does this mean. That's important because as much as people want to know what's happening right now, the information that they yearn for is what does this mean? And journalists, in their rush to produce as much content as humanly possible, have completely forgotten about that what does this mean piece of the equation. And it's not until long form came back into style, like artisanal mustaches and monocles, that journalists suddenly started being okay with long form again. Okay? So this is the story that happened as a result of that algorithm-assisted report. This was on the front page, and this is what I would call computer-assisted reporting 2.0. When I got into journalism, I was in the computer-assisted reporting group of people. This is much more interesting to me than that, because it really is computer-assisted reporting. Okay? So in the case of that LA Times story, so that initial algorithmically derived set of content was updated and rewritten more than 70 times by human beings. Okay? It was just supplemental, time-saving work aided by bots. And like I said, it allowed the journalists to do the much more important analytic work to get them going. There are other companies that have, again, made similar news. Journalists will become irrelevant. Well, no. Okay? But narrative science has figured out a way to look through complicated data sets and basically turn those into a quickie narrative. So when I was a journalist, I used to FOIA for fun. I would literally send out a FOIA request. It was like part of my morning routine. I would just send it out in the morning, and I never knew what I would get back. I would just send out random requests. Well, once I got a really interesting pile of stuff from HUD, and it had to do with a community development block grant that was totally being misused, like seriously being misused and really, really bad. So that's great, but it took me about a month and a half to figure that out because I had to go through these data sets and sort of make sense of some of these numbers. Now, I'm not saying that narrative science is a panacea either, but what a great helpful tool, right, to have for me to figure out some of this stuff so that I can get to the part where I'm ready to go have the interviews and talk to people. And so they've got a new product out called Quill. They're just doing some really interesting things in terms of compiling and making sense of data. There's also computer-assisted editing, which is something I haven't heard anybody talk about. And I want to show you, this is before Time launched their redesign. So there was this whole very, very long story about what if Al-Qaeda gets Syrian chemical weapons. I'm not going to read it to you because it's unreadable. Bad. This was and they're one of our clients, so they're cool. We're all good. We made it work. But this was a really, really difficult story to get into. This was one of those moments where if you had no idea what was going on at this point, you were just not, the abandonment rate on the story was pretty high. There was no, here's what you missed on Glee, okay, way to get into this story. But there could have been. So this is a little script that I've got running. And basically, it goes through very long, complex stories and edits them down into very quick, digestible chunks. Okay, using contextual information, semantic tools, some other things. But basically, here's that entire story, sort of watered down into the 3 paragraphs that I would need to read first so that I could then go back and read this very complex story. Now, a good editor would have forced the reporter to start this way, right? But that doesn't always happen. And it certainly doesn't happen, or it's happening less and less in our rush to get stuff out in this very fast-paced news cycle. This is a easy little thing that anybody can use. It's free. It's called Wikiseer. And it's a very simple way to, like I said, boil down stories and make them more digestible from the outset. And then there's censor-assisted journalism. And I would say we're sort of at a 2.5 or 1.5 area. So this was a project in part co-developed by the MIT Media Lab called Safecast, and it was a way to deploy sensors around Fukushima in Japan after the disaster there to detect radiation levels. And collectively, these sensors were telling a totally different story than the Japanese government was telling its own citizens. This is a cicada tracker. So I would say that in the sensor-based journalism space, John Keefe is probably one of the people leading, maybe the person leading the charge. So he's got this whole thing on cicada trackers and has been doing really cool stuff with WNYC. This was a project from Radiolab. Really, really interesting ways. Again, there was like this cicada thing that was supposed to happen that kind of didn't, at least not as much as everybody was excited talking about. You can get started very, very easily using Arduino, which is a open source platform. And it's simple. I've got my 4-year-old doing some projects. I do the soldering so that she doesn't get burned. But there are much less mechanical ways to get started in this. So this is a beacon. And iBeacons are sort of coming. And these are ways to create very specific geofences. And basically it uses, I'm not going to get technical about it, it uses some stuff with your mobile phone to detect when you're near a place, and then actions happen as a result. So it uses low-emitting Bluetooth and it does some cool stuff. And mostly right now people are thinking about it in terms of shopping. But if we had a breaking news event, like something like if this was the World Trade Center, I would populate, well, with clearance because maybe terrorist act is not the best example here. The Preakness is coming up. I would put, Estimo beacons all over the place and watch people's traffic, right? And see if you see any patterns or correlations. What could you derive, in an interesting way just by looking at people's behaviors in relation to an event that's happening. So I had mentioned John Keefe earlier. One of the best things about John Keefe, and a rare thing, although less so lately, is that as a journalist, he's sort of opened up his playbook. So he says, this is the thing that I just did. So he gets the IP stamp for it, right? And then he says, now everybody else go replicate it. And he will literally give you the recipe for how to do that. So he maintains a website where he lists and talks about all the projects, and he's just a great person. So follow him. Here's why this matters. This is just the beginning. So we're talking about sensors and bots and algorithms and information, and that's all neat. But the part that's coming next, right? So that part's not so exciting to me. What's coming very soon is inferences. That the artificial intelligence will be able to will enable these systems to make inferences about who we are, what we want, and what all of that means. And that's the part that poses some extremely interesting opportunities and some big ethical challenges, I think, going forward. All right, the fourth trend is computational reporting. So turns out you can do some pretty cool stuff with numbers. So this is Stephen Wolfram. If you're interested in math, he has a product called Mathematica. He's one of the best math thinkers in the world. He's also deeply, deeply, deeply interested in personal analytics. So in the quantified self movement, he's both beloved and not beloved. This is what his every keystroke on his computer from 1990 until 2012. And you can record your own keystrokes. Actually, you could, if you wanted, record everybody else's keystrokes in your entire house. Not that I do that, but you could pretty easily. Anyhow, so these are all of his keystrokes. You can see that he was very busy right here. He sort of didn't sleep, right? And then he's sort of back to a normal sleeping pattern. These are daily outgoing emails, averaged by month. So he got really busy, 2010. Monthly distinct email recipients, so his network expanded pretty significantly in 2010. And you can do some pretty neat stuff. So this is me, and this is an analysis of my Facebook profile, not a recent one. But basically, this is an analysis of my friends' genders, relationship statuses, age ranges, age distribution, most common names, okay? So that stuff may not be super useful, but I want to show you some really cool stuff that Wolfram can do because it's a great tool for your students and for newsrooms as well. So I'm logged into Wolfram right here. So I should say there's a free version and a pro version. I'm going to show you the pro version. There's a free version as well. Students get a discount on the pro version. I want to say it's like $4 a month. So I'm going to say, calculate for me, let's just type in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Let's see what happens. So, I mean, this is, and again, you're not going to want to use this data as your final primary source. You're still going to want to, make sure everything is verified. But, circulation, front pages. You can do some other stuff like that. I could see, how about something like flights overhead? So right literally above my head at the moment, probably not my head, it's wherever this transponder is, and but we've got these airlines right above us, and I mean really, really detailed information. That's what it looks like. We could do stuff like Hamlet. So I'm just using data sets that are already here. You can actually upload your own data sets. And to me, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So I've got your basic information about Hamlet. That's helpful. It applies a computational layer on top of something that is not math. So number of words, unique words, whatever, most frequent words, most capitalized words, two-word phrases, right? Number of sentences, characters, okay? Dialogue, acts. Now, maybe this is not going to help a journalist. But let's say we've got a congressional hearing, which we do, happening right now. I could take the transcript from that hearing, right, and dump it into a processing tool like this, and suddenly I can start to make some sense out of what's there, right, in a sort of computational way. So Wolfram Alpha, and then you can do actual math and some other stuff. So it's a very useful tool, keeps getting stronger. It's great for journalists. You don't have to be a professional number cruncher in order to use data every day in journalism. So I'm not going to go in this direction, but I will stop for my quickie public service announcement, one of two today. My first public service announcement is that data and statistics should be mandatory as part of every single journalism program. And it shouldn't be like you've taken your crappy stats class that's totally meaningless and now you're done. Like, statistics should be woven in, and data should be woven in to all of the journalism classes, including broadcast, because broadcasters are really bad at talking about data or using data, and it's especially true of those in public radio. I will not say my public radio station, but many of you know where I live, so you can just make inferences. Like, they read the Wall Street Journal on the newspaper every day for like a minute and a half with all of the numbers listed. It's really terrible, but they do it anyways. Maybe I'm the only one who this bothers. This is a good resource for your students, Wolfram Alpha, but you got to get their feet wet. And if you're not excited about getting their feet wet, there are easy ways without completely blowing up your syllabuses and your curriculum and everything else to make statistics and numbers a part of every single thing that you do. They should be a part of your ethics teaching, ethics classes. They should be a part of your design classes. They should be a part of your basic reading and writing classes. Make it happen. End of PSA. All right, fifth trend is something that I call aggressive versioning. And in this case, what I want to drive home is that you shouldn't teach journalists, don't teach journalism to devices. Because again, like we talked about earlier, you're never going to control the device market. So instead, teach journalism to the situation and to the individual. So this is the New York Times, and this is Fort Hood. We're going to look at a bunch of New York Times, the same story across different platforms and devices right now. So this is a screenshot of my computer at work. This is Firefox, and this is what the story looked like. So just take that in for a second. So Fort Hood gunman was being treated for depression. Photo, caption. This is me scrolling down the page. So this is what the rest of that looked like. There's a video here, another caption, white space, column of text in the middle. Okay? This is a story. This is the same story with me having stripped away. So I used a little script to strip away all of the other information on the page. But let's say that you were using like an Instapaper or a Pocket or some kind of reader. This is what that looks like, that same story. Okay? So, sorry. Webb. Stripped away content for reading on a mobile, if I wanted to read this on my phone or like something else, a tablet or something, okay? It's a lot of text. This is what it looks like on the New York Times now. which is their new app that is meant to make New York Times content on your mobile phone much more compelling. So we have the same exact photo. We have a slightly shorter headline. We have 2 bullets. Okay, and once I get into the, I'm sorry, that wasn't even bullets. Sorry. Bad UX, Amy, bad. So 2 quickie bullets, and this is the story. Once I click through. Okay, same exact headline, same exact story. This is what it looks like just on their mobile app, regular old school. Okay, this is the video on my phone, on my iPad. It's the same story. There is nothing exciting happening here. There's nothing innovative or particularly great happening here. I have said that out loud. It's the same length regardless of my situation. Okay, so device-wise, it looks less cluttered, but clutter should not be the problem that we're solving for. Okay, because people will choose to interact with and your brand, right? And this is, if this is true of nobody else, it is 1,000% true of your students. Okay? They will choose to interact with content, not based on clutter, but based on the situation. I have 5 minutes right now. I just want to be distracted on my phone. Will I play Quiz Up? Will I read the New York Times? Okay? I'm going to the bathroom. I'm sitting, and I want to read for a couple of minutes in the morning to know about what's happening. That is the way, the situation, and how people interact and choose to interact with news content. So we've got here the same basic length, regardless of the situation. It's an ongoing story. What happens if I don't want all this extra stuff at the moment? In my situation, in my case, I really just want updates. That's all I want. Just tell me what the new is. I can no longer go to CNN, because if I do that, watching on television, the website's different. If I go to the television, the new may not come for the next 15 hours, right? Wolf Blitzer will still be blathering on about whatever it is that he's blathering on about. What happens if I need the backstory first? So what happens if I have no entry point into this story because I don't have that here's what you missed on Glee? This doesn't solve for any of that. All it does is look a little bit better. This is the problem, but it actually has a pretty simple solution. So I'm going to show you some charts that you can, all of this, the whole thing is, you can download afterwards. So just bear with me here and you'll get these so that you can actually read them afterwards. But here's one of my thoughts around aggressive versioning. So this should not be a content management description where you're trying to figure out, is this digital first? So we're putting it on the website, and then we're going to prioritize it for mobile and tablet, and then at some point we'll put it in a newspaper. Totally different thing here. This is about having an algorithm that goes one of 2 directions. So I'm going to go this direction first, and then we'll talk about this one. And basically on the back end, it's if device, then. So you've got a single story that has now been written lots of different ways. And there are lots of different elements, which means that the journalist is no longer just writing a single story, that it's probably 1 or 2 journalists, or maybe more, working together and treating every single story as a package. Okay? So if there's a device, they're going to get this version of the story. And if they're on a mobile device, right? Let's just assume we're talking about mobile, then I'm going to check their accelerometer. Okay? What does an accelerometer do again? Checks for my speed. So if I'm doing this with my phone and I happen to have your app open, what am I probably not going to do, I hope, unless you're in New York, which is a whole separate issue. What do? I'm not going to read a 3,000-word story. But if I'm on your app, I'm probably there because I want to know what's going on. So maybe in that case, I get a quick voice in my ear just saying, headline, first graph, bam. And now I'm shocked, right? And after I've seen this, I can stop in my tracks, and then I can read the rest of the story. Okay? Or if the accelerometer shows that I'm not going anywhere, I'm just like standing in one place, then show me a different version of that story. But keep in mind that it's a mobile phone, and iOS is not iOS, right? So I probably just want a handful of bullet points and a photo, or a handful of bullet points and a video, with the ability for me to then link to another piece of that story to get more context. If you show me the full story, if it's breaking news, then maybe I'm getting just bullet points. If it's evergreen content, then maybe I'm getting the full context right away with that here's what you missed on Glee at the beginning. This is just one possibility, like 15 possibilities floating around in my head. Let me show you another one. You could also use an algorithm to determine, is this a lean forward or lean back experience, okay? Again, this is a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But if the algorithm says, okay, if device, then content, then it can say if time of day, then content, because we have a lot of data around when groups of people tend to look at news content, but that actually doesn't apply to me, because I interact with news content, like I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's when I start my day, and I start my day by reading. So I don't gel with the general population. So if time of day for Amy Webb, this is the version of that story she's going to see, because she's most likely to interact with it at this moment in time on her computer, not somewhere else. Or I could do an override and choose a lean forward or lean back experience. I just want the details, right? I want to take my time and read through this whole story. And I'll let you take a look at this later, but here are many, many, many different ways to do that. Here's why this matters. The way that we're teaching journalism, and in fact, journalism itself, is increasingly incompatible with our devices. We're trying really hard to make it a cleaner experience, but we're not fundamentally changing the experience at all. We're trying to continue to smash the square peg of journalism into the more polygonish, weird-looking hole that is technology. And that's a problem. We have to completely reconceptualize how we publish digital content. And I will tell you another thing. For news organizations, and there have been many, producing their content for glass, I don't know if you've ever tried to interact with any news organization's content on these. That's not a good experience. I'm not going to swipe through 8 cards to read your story. I don't even want the headline of your story here. It doesn't occur to me, right? This is not how I'm going to think about getting my news. This is an augmented reality tool, period. Okay? So think about that. And to further drive this point home, some new data out from Pew. Total revenue for American journalism is down 33% in the past 7 years. I know exactly where I was 7 years ago. I'm sure all of you do too, right? It's not a long amount of time. Bessemer Venture has some new data out also, saying that mobile screen valuation, according to them, is now worth $1 billion per square inch. So if you think the news problem is going to get better, right? I don't see, again, digital first is not tech first, and nobody's solving for the tech problem. And this is a tech problem. All right, our last trend before I move on is experiential journalism. So I want to make a confession to you. I'm afraid of heights, very, very badly afraid of heights. So when I was at South by Southwest, it was probably a bad idea for me to go hang out with the Rift. So how many people have seen the Rift, maybe tried it? Invested in it on Kickstarter. So let me quickly give you an overview of what the Rift is. The Rift is an immersive screen experience. So it obviously is, it doesn't look good, it doesn't feel super great. Headphones, huge panoramic screen. There's some really fascinating, the piece of this that's fascinating is how they've built the back end, which is to me also what's fascinating about Google Glass. I'm a fan of Glass, just for the right purpose. So the stuff that powers the Rift is, to me, what's so interesting. Just as a quick example, so anyway, what happens is you can walk into situations. It's not just for gaming. So they had this Game of Thrones experience. You could walk to the wall, for those of you who watch Game of Thrones, and look over the wall. I was just like, oh, the Rift, cool. Turns out, for me, not cool. Very, very bad. You feel it, because you've got a sensory deprivation situation where literally there is nothing but this completely visual, you are surrounded by visual, and you sort of hear what's happening. In a couple of minutes in the environment, your brain starts to trick itself. Our brains are smart. They don't like to get messed with. And so one of the interesting pieces of the technology is that they've managed to minimize lag. So as it turns out, our brains, we get nauseous if there's just a tiny fractions of milliseconds of time between us taking information from our eyes and it being sent for analysis by our brain. We can tolerate a certain teeny tiny fraction of lag. Anything beyond that, and we get nauseous. Anything really beyond that, it seems totally unrealistic. okay? But that's one of the things that they've managed to solve for, which is part of why this is so thrilling and so exciting, okay? Now, snowfall. We all talked about snowfall. How many of you taught snowfall in your classes? Okay? So snowfall was this amazing, and it really was this amazing visual experience on the web. Imagine, based on what I've told you just now, if you had the rift on your head and you were able to put yourself inside of snowfall without the accident part, right? Suddenly, it's a very, very different experience. It's experiential journalism. Remember Rising from Ruin? One of, I think still to this day, even though it's been several years, one of the great multimedia journalism projects. Can you imagine being in the middle of Hurricane Katrina's aftermath as a user and walking around and interacting with the interviews, the people, right? This isn't just about looking around at the wall. I could literally walk up to some of the very compelling characters that were part of the story that made the story so great. Walk up to them and have them tell me, look me in the eye, right, and tell me their story. Suddenly, something very, very different. Or what about what's happening out in Seattle? Right? Suddenly that story makes so much more sense. If you don't live on the coast or near water, you have no concept of what a mudslide is. You don't understand what that means. And it's even difficult. The reporting on it has been great, but it's hard to really understand. A hurricane is something visual. We understand wind because we've all experienced at some point wind. If you haven't been near a mudslide before, you have no idea what that's like, or why it's so devastating, or why it's been so difficult to rescue people. An environment like the Rift, right, and that type of platform gives you a completely different understanding of that story. This is public interest journalism, unlike anything we've imagined before. Suddenly, that flat picture is no longer flat. Experiential journalism. Now, the Rift is not the only platform. It's not the only device. There are lots of competitors, and this is going to be a big thing going forward, in part because there's a lot of money in gaming. So let's allow tech companies to leverage that and benefit from what gets developed on the other end. And let's not wait around for that to happen. Let's start with universities. Let's you guys get together with devs and figure out what this means for journalism. Glass is great for augmented reality. I look at a building, I get information on what that building is. I look at shoes, there is such a thing, by the way. I look at somebody's shoes, I love those shoes, I want those shoes, it identifies them, I tap, I buy, okay? That makes sense for glass, heads-up displays, right? Journalism does not. Immersive reality, right? This is immersive reality, and this is what's different. So why does this matter? Because we have already seen some instances where this technology is being used to develop for training, for storytelling. Storytelling is a big piece of this because the gaming world is all about storytelling, and education. This, I think, is probably the most important future platform for news. Actually, let me change that. It could be the most important future platform for news. Now is the best possible time to start thinking about it. All right, so I'm going to switch gears and close with 3 recommendations and 1 syllabus. So my first recommendation is open source journalism. It's good to collaborate, connect, and conspire. This is a project from Mel Kramer, who does social media at NPR. This is a Tumblr. Well, basically, she'd started it internally for folks at NPR. Here's some interesting stuff you're finding. Here's some interesting stuff I'm finding. Let's smash it all together. And she sort of produces this as an internal resource. Well, they've now made it available for the public. So anybody can look at this. This is a great opportunity for people at NPR, but it's also a great opportunity for journalists and for your students. This is Reddit. This is, what is this? Oh, I didn't show the first screen. So there's a couple of things on Reddit which you should go to a lot. These are some great projects that are there. This is not Reddit, this is GitHub, I'm sorry. That makes more sense. So on GitHub, there are plenty of journalists who are sharing their code, sharing their projects. You don't have to get your hands dirty with code, and I would actually recommend that you don't, all of you, but you should be aware of opportunities for your students and encourage them to get involved, and this is one way to do that. This is the Open Syllabus project. where you can contribute, share, learn, collaborate. And this is Coursera. So I know that Coursera is very controversial within academic spheres. How many people in here have used Coursera to teach? I don't know if any of the schools are, and to learn. We're all time-strapped. I got to tell you, I love Coursera. I try to take one class every unit of time that classes are offered, and I've been brushing up on math and data analysis. There's all kinds of stuff. It's not, if you don't show up, if you don't do the coursework, as a professor, you understand how infuriating that is, but as a company, the conclusion rate is, the abandonment rate's pretty high, so even if you just want to get a survey, get the lexicon, get the wheels spinning again, this is an easy way to do that. You should definitely take a look. Journalism academics should share more resources. Some of you do that. A lot don't. You may have come up with the greatest syllabus ever in the history of the planet, but part of what's going to make that class so phenomenal is you. So if you've developed some tools that are great, that are engaging, and you found some cool stuff, that's not IP, I think, that you have to protect. I think that that's great. That would be a great resource for others at your university or others at other universities. And share more within your departments as well. I know a lot of universities, people tend to not collaborate, get together, share a lot, and you should. Second recommendation, you got to start showing students more options. There are acts of journalism happening all over the place that tend to get overlooked. Disclosure, I'm on the board of directors for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, so now that I've said that. I've been working with them on their digital strategy so that we're starting to think of the orchestra more as a sort of content producer in many ways. And I have many reasons for wanting to do that, but we've just launched an embedded reporter, which is definitely the wrong word to use, I now know. Should have been called like a residency or something, but it's a paid fellowship. It does have editorial independence. You can't, if somebody wants to write like the 22 sexiest tubas with a Z, they're not going to publish that, but neither would the New York Times, I hope. So this is a really, really great fellowship. It's a great opportunity for somebody who's interested in arts reporting, and there aren't very many arts reporting jobs around anymore. And this one pays and offers full benefits. So there's an opportunity. The International Center for Journalists has all kinds of fellowships. And these are great for students to get their feet wet with projects when they're coming out of school. But it's also great for people like academics, and maybe you want to take a sabbatical and sort of go do a little bit of work again. These things are open to you as well. There are also places, as I mentioned, Vox, like Quartz, like The Wire. I remember when I was a journalism student, like all anybody cared about was getting at one of the big newspapers or getting on one of the big networks. And this stuff was all overlooked. Well, I got news for you. Some of the most innovative journalism is coming out of these new places. And it's important that you help journalism students understand that the pinnacle of their career may not be the Washington Post. And that's okay. It may be getting to the highest ranks at the Atlantic Media Company, which is doing really great stuff, really interesting tech stuff. Journalism schools focus far too much on traditional news outlets. You don't partner with these outside companies. You don't have relationships with them. You go to the old standbys, the traditional old media orgs. And again, that's fine, but now's a really great time to broaden your horizon. Third is that you have to market yourselves better. So this may or may not be true of all of you, but I know that from some of my friends who are in charge of journalism programs, that applications are down a lot. Interestingly, though, there are more and more journalism jobs available all the time. Yesterday's news notwithstanding, 2 days ago. So the challenge here is that smart kids want tech degrees. They don't want journalism degrees. And I think that's your fault. Okay? Because the market's picked back up. The problem is that journalism schools don't make journalism sound very interesting. I went to Columbia, and to be honest with you, if I was in the same boat today, I wouldn't have gone. I would never have gone. And my career path has changed, but standing right here before you, I don't necessarily see the value of a journalism education. And I'm somebody who believes strongly in what you do. So part of the challenge here is marketing and helping people understand that journalism is great in a lot of ways. right? And that the kinds of education that you are no longer the ivory tower piece of the dying industry, but there's great training to be had within your programs. This is not about launching trendy classes, which is the main change that I've seen at a lot of journalism programs. You guys have the ability to do the research. You guys have the ability to do the R&D. You do. You're just not doing it. And this is not about just hiring some data professor or some statistician and including them in your department, although that's a good step. This is not just about launching a quickie, trendy class. This is about making the degree matter more. And so that means talking about entrepreneurial stuff, because journalism, like it or not, is part and parcel of every single thing that's happening out in Silicon Valley. So the more that there's an integration in the way that you're creating your curriculum, the better. And adjunct faculty shouldn't be restricted to just working journalists. I could give you a list of 100 people who should come to your schools and teach because they've got real-world knowledge to share. You should have the whole Oculus Rift team. Call Dolly Singh. Don't. She will not be happy. But you call Oculus and have them come and talk to you about what's happening. EVE Online, EVE Online, is one of the biggest, highest grossing ever in the history of the computers and biggest multimedia player games around. It's all about free market. Economists study what happens in EVE Online because it's really interesting case studies. Well, guess what? They also create content within those worlds, and the guy who's now the chief content officer is based in New York, and they're doing all kinds of content deals with movie houses and television studios. They know a lot about storytelling that in the digital space that for some reason journalists don't. He's a good guy to come and teach in your program. I would invite him to teach before I would invite some reporter who's won a Pulitzer, which is not to say that a Pulitzer isn't an incredible accomplishment, just that realistically, he probably at the moment has more to offer your students, and if you get Torfy, you're gonna have no problem getting people to enroll in your school. No problem. All right, so I'm gonna close, before I open up with questions, with a summer syllabus. For all of you, I have already distributed it. You can download it, but this is not a syllabus for your students. This is a syllabus for you. I am sending all of you to summer school. So I created for you an 8-week summer class, and I'm holding office hours for you. I'm incredibly busy, so they're not actual office hours. They're like time-shifted virtual, meaning you can email me, and I will email you back. But I want to highlight a couple things. So basically, I am not in the camp that thinks all of you need to learn how to code. I don't think you need to learn how to code. I do think it would be helpful for you to expose yourselves to some of the stuff that I know. So some of these emerging trends, some of these people, stuff that's happening out in Silicon Valley, ways that people are more innovative and creative, and that's what this is about. So on this list, I've got 3 books you have to read. I have Notes on a Final Exam, which is basically like, if you got through everything and did most of what's there, like, buy yourself a beer. If not, listen to Miley Cyrus. But there are 8 weeks, and one of the weeks focuses just on ephemeral content. So you'll have to download Whisper, you'll have to download Secret, Snapchat, and play with some of these things, delete them later. There's another one on virality. So why does content go viral? Kicked off by a book called Contagious, which all of you should read. And then, after you've read that book, you spend the week reading every single day Upworthy and BuzzFeed and some other sites. And you'll just start to see these connections that you totally, it will make sense to you. You will totally get it. There's a week that's really focused on millennials, since you're teaching them. There's a week on the history of Silicon Alley and Silicon Valley. So the Valley, we all know, Silicon Alley is another name for New York City. There are certainly other places where awesome stuff is happening in terms of development. But this will give you a history and a quickie background on who the players are, the history, who's doing what, which websites are constantly gossiping, and how journalism is evolving because of all of that. And I've included Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. He's a big VC guy who everybody pays a lot of attention to. So anyhow, there's a lot of great stuff in here. Obviously, it's not mandatory, but if you have 8 weeks this summer, I would strongly recommend that you give this as take this time. All the stuff is pretty light reading. It'll just hopefully by the end of those 8 weeks totally have shifted your focus so that you really are seeing things in a very, very different way. There's 1 week where you have to build something, but I listed a bunch of options so that if you're, just to get your hands wet, you don't have to know code, you don't have to know how to solder, but there are resources in place, things for you to download to just get started on those things. And the hope is that by the time that you start your school year, you'll have a totally fresh perspective and a different way to interact with your students going forward. So you can download everything here. It's j.mp/JiConf 2014. The capitalization matters. And we've got a couple questions, or a couple minutes, I think, for questions. And then you have lunch, and you have to talk into the microphone when you ask your questions. And if you don't have questions, that's also fine.
So Rob Wells is going to be coming around with the mic. If you have questions, just raise your hand. He's going to pick people. Be about 10 minutes or so.
Sure. It doesn't have to be a question. You could also say, I totally disagree with you. I am disagreed with often.
So Amy, I totally disagree with you.
Okay.
Just kidding. I am interested in what you say about making the degree relevant, and actually our applications for our major have been going up, not down. I'm curious if other people have been experiencing that in the room and why that might be. I wonder if
Can I pause you there and
Sure.
maybe you don't want to answer this, and maybe you should not answer. Don't answer this question. But let me plant this.
Now I
seed.
really want to answer it.
How's the quality and diversity
Of the students,
of the applicant pool?
it's fantastic actually. So we have.
I have heard the opposite a lot of places. So that's great.
Yeah. So and well, there may be a lot of reasons, but I'm a little concerned about the conflict between some of what you were presenting in the beginning and the idea of not chasing trends. So could you just talk a little bit more about how we all should be, what kinds of tools we can be using to stay relevant and stay ahead and follow these kinds of things, but not go down the rabbit hole of constantly turning to the latest thing. So all of a sudden now I'm going to focus
I hope I didn't give you the impression that you should not be experimenting with new tools and chasing trends. That's not what I intended to say. Was this because of the don't just teach a trendy class?
Don't build classes. I probably misstated this. Don't
Here's
build
why.
classes that are trend followers, but how do we introduce those things in the classes that we have, given that a lot of us have very non-nimble structures?
So let me rephrase that. The iterative cycle of curricula, and especially with syllabuses and everything, like stuff just moves too slow. And so the thing for programs that are feeling the pressure, they'll like randomly offer like Tumblr for journalists. I'm trying to think of, I've heard some really stupid ones. And it sounds like from the outside, oh, they get it. You know, they're working, they're doing this. But nothing has fundamentally changed in the curriculum. Okay, I hope you understand now why I feel so strongly about digital first versus tech first. I don't know a single tech first curricula. I don't know, and not that every single journalism curriculum needs to be, but I don't know a single curriculum that even has like sprinkles of tech first. You know, if you're at the end of by the time your students graduate, if you're proud of them because they've coded a website or they've put together some really fancy schmancy like multimedia video, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because BuzzFeed hired Zay Frank. And he has 50 people in Los Angeles that are currently fundamentally changing the way that video is being deployed on the web. And that is totally incongruous with how journalism professors are teaching video. Now, in terms of quality, there is definitely a place for high quality documentary-style journalism, and that certainly is not what BuzzFeed is doing. The challenge is that there has to be a exposure to all of that. And so, when I see journalism, programs offer 1 or 2 classes, and they're like, we're really up with the times, nothing's changed. Every single one of your classes, from my point of view, it's possible that there's some curriculum somewhere that is really earth-shattering that I've never seen. They all should be scrapped. They all should be scrapped, and you should really think hard about how you're presenting information, what your expectations of students are, what they should be doing, how they should be thinking, and more importantly, how you're going to change and evolve that curriculum, very quickly. Now, it's not entirely your fault. You can't do that because there's this accreditation system which operates even more slowly than you do. And so if you try to gut your whole curriculum and start over, you've now got an accreditation system where you've got other schools judging the work that you've done. I mean, I think the whole system is kind of messed up. So you can't solve for that at the moment. What you can do, a tangible takeaway from this, is to start infusing all of your courses, short of gutting the curriculum. I would much rather see all of the courses include what I've been talking about, versus offering 1 or 2 classes that have like a buzzword in them. Because if you teach Tumblr today, that's fine, but that information is totally not going to serve your student by the time that she's starting her first job. Strategy around Tumblr makes more sense. I don't see any strategy classes being offered. And the same goes for entrepreneurial journalism. Q&A has a whole so yes, talk to him. Q&A's got a whole separate department, and it's a separate focus, but every journalism program needs to include some of those elements. And if you really want to get good at this, you need to teach journalists how they are also their own marketing departments and their own tech teams. And you have to expand thinking, okay? I once taught somewhere where I had students terrified writing. They're terrified. And they were like battered. And I was like, what is wrong with you guys? I'm in a great mood. I love to teach. It's my thing. And they were terrified because if they spelled one thing wrong, I had to automatically fail them. And I was like, you're joking, right? And they weren't joking. If they got one thing in the AP style book wrong, or they spelled one thing wrong, they were supposed to be failed for the course. And I actually looked back then through the materials, and I was supposed to do that. And I would never have taught that class if I knew that that was the case, because that's stupid. That's stupid. There's no way to, unless you are a journalist who is etching out unless you're using a linotype, right? Like, you get auto-corrected, even if you don't want to. So what, that makes no sense. It makes no sense for the students who are in classes right now, but you're forgetting about what happens when they leave the school a couple of years from now. That is not a skill that's going to be important for them. So why bother? Teach them something, make them nervous about something else. That's not the PSA. I have a second PSA, but I'll tell you about that at the end. Anything else?
Other questions?
There's a question up here.
Up here in the front, Rob?
No,
Wait,
we
hold
have
on.
video.
We're recording video. Sorry.
So just a very simple question. How do we sign up for your summer course?
You don't have to sign up for it. Literally, just download that PDF and do the stuff, or do some of the stuff. And if you want to talk to me about it, email me, and I will email you back. Although it may not be immediately. It'll be soon. There's nothing to sign. It's like kitschy. So it's not a course, but it is. I mean, it's an actual syllabus. So yeah, just do it.
I just downloaded it, and I got your presentation for today, and it has the first page.
Yeah. So I didn't include 2 links. If you look at SlideShare, the first link on that page is the syllabus.
Okay.
So it's 2 documents.
Very good.
Yeah. Bad user experience. Sorry, I should have given you 2 links. I was trying to make it easy.
Other questions?
So do I?
Here in the back, Rob.
Meet you halfway to save time. I love the idea about having the people who are too busy to visit campus come and help to teach. How do you recruit them?
So that's a great.
I'm from BYU.
Yeah.
We have great skiing. I offered to take people skiing. They still didn't come.
So I get asked a lot. I am not in the pantheon level of the people that I'm even talking about, and I can tell you that for me, depending on the situation, because you guys can't pay, right? So depending on the.
Oh yeah, we pay.
Well, a lot of.
Yeah, a little bit.
Again, like up in this, what your version of pay is and what outside world's version of pay is quite different. So.
You're right. We don't.
Technically, there's a check being written, but it does, yeah. So we know that that's going to be a challenge. So here's my recommendation. My recommendation would be to, come up with this is about marketing. So come up with a program, name it something that does not sound academic-y, okay? And make it, at a certain point in people's careers, I'm speaking at West Virginia's commencement, West Virginia University, where I did not go to school, and I don't know anybody there, and I said yes, and I'm somebody who speaks a lot, and suddenly I'm going to do it. I'm happy about it. I said yes because it was such an honor to be asked, and now I'm like, I can't use a PowerPoint. I can't talk about tech trends. I have to tell these, to inspire people. But I said yes because it seemed like such a big deal. So make it seem like a big deal is what I'm trying to get at. Make it seem like a big deal, and they will come. And don't try to rein in 15 people during the year. Try to get like 3. And there's nothing worse as a speaker. So in my case, and I do this occasionally, there's nothing worse as a speaker than showing up and you don't have bodies in the room. It doesn't happen often, but when I have spoken at universities, a lot of times students just don't show up. And part of the problem is that this is your fault. Because you guys are like New York Times, New York Times, New York Times. You get Torfy in from Eve Online, and unless they've played Eve Online, they're not going to understand why he's so important. And P.S., he's an amazing presenter. He's an amazing person. Wealth of information to share. So it's your job to change the conversation at your universities. To help them, for my money, Eve Online is a far more fascinating company, and I feel like I have far more to learn from Torfy than most of the fancy news organizations where you would have somebody come and speak from. So part of it is that, but if you market it the right way and you ask the right way, they're going to say yes. And if you want to figure out who some of those people are, email me and I'll tell you. And if I don't know, find some people locally who are plugged in, or better yet, do the syllabus. Honestly, by the end of this syllabus, you'll know who those people are, because I will have exposed you to all of them. Or right now, and then because you know what to be looking at from now on, you'll know who the up-and-comers are. So, all right, so PSA, quickly. Here's my PSA, my second PSA, last. And that is, speech and debate programs all over the country are being closed down. And where I went to school, my speech and debate program was closed because of funding. Communications departments are where speech and debate programs are. I would say more than technology, more than writing, more than anything else, journalists need to have the ability to communicate their thoughts. The more that they are able to do that, the better. And so my little PSA is hackathons are great, whatever, all these things are great, but if you can reignite those speech and debate programs within your colleges, they're not that expensive, and that will, I promise you, be the best possible set of tools that you can give a kid who's graduating. So please think in terms of your budgets and divert a little bit back to your speech and debate programs. That's it.
Well, thank you to Amy Webb for an amazing presentation and a really valuable contribution, I think, to all of us in at how we approach all of these trends. She has, every time she speaks to us,